Hello, and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers. And after spending the last couple of videos on Foliax, having a look around at what's been going on over there, I thought it'd be quite nice to have a quick glance around the rest of the solar system, where we've been making some updates steadily over the last few weeks, and I haven't really talked about those, because there's always been the latest planet where exciting things have been going on, and I've wanted to talk about that instead. So let's start off with Norvis, because that is the centre of the world as far as we're concerned. It's where our largest factory is, and it's where things generally are going on in this game. And the most exciting thing that's happened on this planet recently is what was described as a spawner outpost riot. And that was because we ran out of bioflux. And I think we ran out of bioflux because the Gleba export ship had flown over to Gleba and was trying to pick up some quality inserters. And it ended up sitting there for rather a long time, waiting for those to be produced. And it ended up sitting there for a bit too long, and we ran out on Norvis. And now that shouldn't be too serious a problem, because in theory the interrupt should have the ship leave after 120 seconds. As long as it's got enough science on board. And so it shouldn't really be a problem. We shouldn't have the ship sitting over there for ages. However, it apparently did. Either that, or maybe we just maybe it wasn't able to pick up enough bioflux while it was over there. Maybe it had we got through it in a funny way on Norvis. But anyway, something weird had happened, and we ran out of bioflux on Norvis, and that meant we didn't get bioflux brought over to here. And so that meant that all the spawners ended up starving. You get the warning on popping up on them saying a shortage of food. They get grumpy. All of this runs out, and eventually they start to lose health, and when they get down to 0 health, they then revert back into being normal biter spawners. And that's kind of unfortunate when that happens, because that means that they'll then start spawning biters, and you can't get any eggs out of them. So not only do you lose your supply of eggs, but you also suddenly have enemies over here that need to be dealt with. And so we were alerted to that when some of the biters started eating a few of the laser turrets and the roboports and some of the substations around over here. And yeah, that caused some issues, should we say. Things went badly fairly quickly, and we had to swoop in and make some fixes. Unfortunately, all of the players were over on Foliax working on that planet, and Foliax hasn't got to the point where it's ready to start launching rockets yet. We've got blue circuits being produced in sort of decent quantities, but we spoilers for a future video. But we don't have low density structures, we don't have rocket fuel, we certainly don't have rockets, and so we're not allowed to leave that planet at the moment. And so Sophia was able to fix that with the magic of the Spidertron. So he got together a Spidertron, which has its own little parking space down here apparently, and he's loaded that up with rocket launchers, obviously because it's a Spidertron, and then a huge stock of capture bot rockets, some in the weapon magazines there, and then loads more in the inventory, just so you can be sure of not running out of them. It's also got some repairy bits and pieces. We've got some substations in here, we've got loads of laser turrets, roboports, and some bots as well. So in theory, this guy can trundle back out there, and it's got extra speed, and it's got a couple of roboports as well. So this guy can scamper out there, and it can fix up any problems that happen down here due to the spawners becoming unspawned, should we say, becoming uncaptured. And it was actually really quite impressive watching it run through, just launching a bajillion rockets every second, just to quickly take over all of the spawners down here. And then, as you can see, they're now all recovered. Fortunately, the lasers are smart enough, because if you have a spawner that it becomes uncaptured, it is marked as not a target, so the lasers wouldn't attack it anyway. And so this was able to make sure that we then cleared out any biters that were in there, and then the Spidertron could run through, recapture, and now we're back to normal. And if I pull a copy planner over here like this, you can see that we still have the 78 spawners captured that we had before. So the area is still safe, which is nice to know. One minor problem we did run into with this was that when the biters spawned in, they destroyed some of the substations in here. And due to what was available at the time, Sophia had used a number of the higher tier or higher quality substations. And higher quality substations have a slightly longer cable range between them. And so that meant that when the substations got replaced, we lost some of these red circuit connections that are going from over here, the control system, the brains of the eggs requesters, over to the inserters that are pulling the eggs out of the spawners. It took us a moment or two to work out what had happened over here, but then once we had worked it out, Sophia was then able to go through, rewire them all in, so everything started working again. And now when a train arrives over here and says, "Can I have some eggs please?" the inserters over here will all swing into action and start pulling the eggs out of the spawners here. We've got 100 of them at the moment. We can dump them into the blue chest, and then they can be picked up and taken away, as I described in a previous video. So that was fun. That was, as described, a bit of a riot, but we went in and managed to quell it without too much difficulty. And there's a bit of attention happening at the top here as well, but we are well equipped to defend against that. Elsewhere around Norvis, I corrected the plastic production system over here to make sure that we weren't using speed beacons against the plastic bar production, because the plastic bar production is trying to produce quality plastic and therefore speed beacons will upset it. I made some minor changes to the oil refinery system over here. So this is the one I talked about before, where we're pulling out the wood from this station as well now, and we seem to have run out of oil, which is a bit of a concern. That's going to need to be looked into. But I came in through here and I upgraded this to use the biochambers instead of the chemical plants we've been using down here before, and set this basic system up. But there were a few things we realised that could have been done better. So, for example, there are now separate inserters over here taking spoilage out of all of these biochambers, because they've got a load of fuel in them that is gradually spoiling. They do have a load of nutrients. There may well be too many biochambers here, to be honest. We probably shouldn't have them all running. Maybe I need to put in some smarts along here to tell the last few machines to stop running and only run the first 2 or 3. Because this is a bit overspec, and it does mean we are just wasting some wood pulp in order to turn into nutrients, which are then going to go off and then get dumped onto the belt. However, it is just being made out of wood, which, as we're aware, does in fact grow on trees, so there's not too much of a concern there. And then we've now set the steam that's being generated over here, that's needed to turn the wood into wood juice, is now being made here, because I've got the splitter that's bringing out the spoilage has been moved from down here, where it's just dumping it into a heating tower, to move to up here, where it's dumping it into a different heating tower, and that's keeping this at 500 and mumbledy degrees C, which we can then use to bring out the heat to these heat exchangers here, which are boiling water that's coming out of a lake somewhere. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But we're then pumping that steam up into these tanks, and from there we have an underground pipe going over to here to allow us to then prioritise this steam over the steam that's been made by burning wood, in order to make the wood juice here. And then if we have an excessive quantity of the steam, we can then pump that through into these turbines in order to generate electricity to keep the rest of the factory running. Now, generating electricity here is not vital, because we have some massive nuclear power plants set up on in this factory. There's 3 of them here, 3 quad reactor setups in these, 3 double quads in these city blocks down here, and I think there are some more as well. Yep, there's another 2 up there, and another 3 over here as well. So we have 14 quad reactor setups on Norvis, keeping the entire planet running, which is a crazy amount of nuclear power. And so the amount of energy I'm generating here from these little turbines in here connected up to these tanks is going to be insignificant against the power of the Force. I mean, the close to 80 reactors we have running around the factory. However, it's a way of just using up the steam in a sort of a fairly sensible and useful way, and so that's going to generally be better. Notably here, even though we've got this whole system saying to get rid of the spoilage nicely, we've still got spoilage in the hands of these inserters that are trying to unload it, because they just don't have anywhere to dump it onto this belt, because it's completely full from the earlier biochambers. So yes, this is clearly a bit overspec and unnecessary, but never mind. It's basically okay. Anyway, yeah, so we're making a little bit of electricity here. That's fine. I don't think much else has changed around here, but that is a nice little improvement that will make the system work a bit better around here. It's a bit more satisfying using the heat that comes from the spoilage we're burning in order to generate the steam to make more nutrients, rather than burning extra wood in order to make the steam and then just essentially voiding the spoilage by putting it into a heating tower and then not doing anything with the heat. So I'm very happy to have done this in a slightly nicer way. In this area, I also fixed the controls on here, so we're now running when there's fewer than 2 piles of nutrients in this machine rather than the 10 it was on before, because this kept triggering when it shouldn't have done, and it's slightly less efficient to run it with this machine than it is with the rest of them. This is just there to bootstrap. And I sorted out the pipe work in the top area up here, so we've got the oil now being brought down into here, and then from here back up into here. And it looks like a train's been in the time I was talking about this, because all these tanks have been filled back up again, so that's working nicely. No further notes on this area, I don't think. Next up on Norvis, we have Mike's blue circuit producer and upcycling system. So we talked about this before. We're making a quantity of blue circuits up here with as many quality modules as we can put in there. And so blue circuits are coming out at a steady dribble. We seem to be a bit short of green circuits at the moment, so the system is not working brilliantly, but we'll look into that in a second. So those are coming out down here. Some of them are tier 2. There's probably going to be some tier 3s coming through here occasionally. Oh, there's one, for example. And so, lovely. We're making some slightly better circuits. They're then being fed into the upcycler over here, because we've got enough tier 1 and tier 2s. So the tier 3s are being allowed through, as you can see here, but the tier 1s and tier 2s are being recycled, which turns them back into red circuits and green circuits. And Technically, then maybe there's some sulfuric acid, but the recyclers don't know what to do with liquid, so I guess it just seeps out into the water table. That's probably fine. It's not like there's any biters around here to get upset about the pollution. Anyway, yes, those then get taken away. So we're splitting out over here, as you can see. The tier 2s are coming out this way in order to be passed up into these machines to then be made into blue circuits again, hopefully at a higher tier. Well, they're definitely going to be at least tier 2, and with these quality modules in there, we should get out some tier 3s and tier 4s. In fact, there's a couple of tier 4s. So this system, again, is working, feeding into the same outputs over there. But there seems to be a bit of a backlog along this belt here. I think that's because we're splitting the belt in half here. All of the tier 2s is being split in half, and then one half is going to this pair of machines, and the other half is going to these 4 machines. So that's not very well balanced. What we actually need is to have a 1 to 3 balancer in over here to split out to the 3 sets of machines evenly, so we don't end up with a backlog on one of them and then I would say running out on the others. They actually don't seem to run out. All the machines are actually running at the moment. And then there's some more machines down here at the bottom which maybe have, we'll have the same problem, but there seems to be a lot more output going this way than there is going this way, which is weird because the input is being split evenly over here as far as I can tell. No, it's not. We've got the same problem over here. So we've got the input of the circuits coming into this splitter. Half of them are going to these machines, which is why there's a bit of a backlog down there. Then of the rest, half are going to this column, and then the final quarter is being split between the last 2 columns, which are the ones that are then going to down over here, presumably. No, I take that back. It's being split again here, with half of it going around this way into the first system. Ah, I see the problem. It's because there's a missing belt here, and that means that everything that is higher than tier 1 is being sent down this belt round here and going into the first set of machines over here. The other side is okay, so we are getting a decent quantity of it through there, but also we're getting more of it through this way than we should be. So if I put that in there, that should then send a bit more down this way, which will help. But I think we need to fix the balancing over here a little bit, and the same problem will exist over here, I imagine. Yes, it will, because of the way these are split up. There is a problem with the splitting going on over here. However, I don't think it's actually a serious problem, because we are splitting the outputs here evenly between all the other machines over here. So that's fine. And if this does ever back up, then it'll just mean more will go through this way. So these machines are underutilized, sure, compared to these ones, but that isn't actually a problem. It just means that more of these machines are having to work harder. Anyway, the point is that at the moment we could do with some splitters over here. Although that said, having just made that tiny little change over here, that seems to have allowed the backlog to be pulled through over here, and things are now okay. So maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's not as bad as I was suggesting it was, and having dropped in that one piece of belt, everything seems to be okay. Anyway, that isn't the fix I came here to look at. The fix I came in here to look at was, well, if you remember last time, a lot of the machines along here were doing tier 1 rebuilding, whereas now Mike has fixed it so that any tier 1 quality output circuits from here that are being brought round these top belts and then being put back in on the input over here to flow in and then be passed through as if they'd come from the station, so they go into all the main machines up here. However, he discovered that was jamming up. There are so many green circuits coming out of the recycling because you get a lot out. It takes 20 green circuits to make one blue circuit, and that means when you feed a blue circuit in here, you get 5 green circuits back out on average. And so there were so many of them coming along here, this belt was backing up all the way along and jamming up the system. So Mike has fixed that by putting in a read on the belts over here. He's seeing how many circuits are on each of these belts, and he's feeding that up to here, and he's saying if there's a lot of them, if there's more than 50, then turn these input belts off, because there's so much coming through from here that we want to let it through before we bring any more new ones in from the station and let them have priority. Now, I think he's gone a bit too far the other way, because you'll notice that there aren't very many going through on the belts up here, and I think that's starving quite a lot of the machines. Well, actually, it's not starving them right now, because I think we had a big burst of them going through just before I started talking about this bit. However, sometimes it does seem to be starving the input a little bit over here. You can see that the green circuits coming in here aren't getting very far down the belt. And yep, there we go. All these machines are now going red. They're stopping running simply because there aren't enough green circuits coming through. So at the moment there's 800 on the belt over there, which is clearly a lot more than 50, which is why these aren't running. However, that 800 or 900, that 1,000 is still not enough to keep all the machines over here running. And so, I don't know, it's a tricky one, because you don't want to risk blocking the belts up along here, and you'd think that having these priorities on the inputs here would be enough, but apparently it's not, because the system did jam up and had some issues. And let's try and trigger that. Let's turn off the fix that Mike put in there and deliberately break it, put it back the way it was before. And now you can see we've got the green circuits pouring through here from the inputs out on this side. I was going to say I'm not sure why we're getting slightly fewer coming through on here, but these aren't actually gaps in the belt. These are slightly smaller stacks. So you can see there's only one stacked up there in amongst the fours. So yeah, at the moment, right now, we have enough coming through here, but we'll give it a moment or two to flow and we'll see if it does become a problem again. I feel like these input priorities should be enough to make sure that we always use up what's coming through here, but that does rely on having a steady flow of the green circuits through here, and you can see that there is not a steady flow. These are stuttering and juddering and not flowing absolutely constantly. So I can see it being possible that we will get that back pressure along here, especially now that all of these machines have kicked in and we're getting a lot more blue circuits being built. And look at that, we've got almost a full belt of blue circuits coming through here, and so that's going to mean there's going to be a lot more green circuits coming out here at the bottom because of the recycling. They're all going to flood down here, and I can see that potentially being a problem. It doesn't seem to have triggered yet, but I could definitely see it potentially being a problem. Okay, the blue belts have backed up all the way now. Maybe that's what happens. Maybe the blue belts, because we can't recycle fast enough, maybe the belts outputting with the blue circuits on them back up all the way back up here, and then we stop bringing green circuits in because these machines stop, and then maybe the whole system jams? I could see that being possible. It feels like it shouldn't happen because you're only getting a quarter as many green circuits out from here as you're taking in into all the machines up here. However, because of the stacking, if we find that the green circuits aren't being stacked up highly enough along here, because sometimes they're coming out of here in ones rather than fours, at that point that could offset the extra number that are going in here, and I could see that potentially being a problem. And yeah, looking along here, the belts are definitely not running flat out. And there we go, you can see it starting to jam up along one side of the belt here. Maybe? I could certainly believe that could be a problem. You can see the blue circuits jamming up along here. Let's give it a moment and see what happens. Okay, unfortunately my experiment has been thrown off a little bit by us running out of red circuits over here, and therefore the blue circuit production has slowed down enough. But if we look along here, you can see that it is actually getting a bit jammy all the way along here. We've got the backlog has come all the way back down along to here, so I could definitely see this being a problem in the future, especially if these machines stopped running quite as quickly as we would like them to. And if we look at the belts over here, we can see that we've only got 1300 on the belt now, and that's not that much more than when I looked earlier and said, oh, it's about 1000, when it was working absolutely fine. And so, yes, I think there is definitely a potential problem here. I'm not sure that Mike has found the correct solution to it, but there is a problem here that needs some sort of fix to be put into it. Finally, for this planet, Mark says he's fixed the sand output station. Good. I don't know what was wrong with it, but apparently he's fixed it, so apparently there is no longer a problem here. Well done there. Moving up into space, we had some comments on the video saying that, hey, did you know that if you build your space platforms out of the low density space platform, so building your spaceships, which are technically called space platforms, out of this stuff, the low density space platform foundation, instead of this stuff, the space platform foundation, they go significantly faster. So we thought, okay, that sounds useful, so we'll go in, we'll upgrade the Lime, because that tends to be the one that we're sitting around waiting for most often, because this is the ship that goes off and collects all the resources required for building out our outpost. So at the moment it's in orbit over Foliax, as you can see down here in the background, and so while we're building on Foliax, we will use loads and loads of belts and machines and whatever we're using on that planet, and then every so often we'll need it to fly off over to Norvis or wherever else to go and get a restock and bring more supplies over to drop down onto the planet to keep us building there. And so it would be nice if this ship could do that very, very quickly, especially when it does the grand tour and goes off to every single planet we've ever been to in order to pick up all the possible resources we could need. And that takes a while, because that's a long old flight to go around the whole solar system. So we thought, yeah, let's try and make this one a bit faster. Unfortunately, it had basically no effect. Apparently mass doesn't have much of an effect on ship's speed. It's mostly down to the number of engines you've got at the back and how wide the ship is as well. And so essentially, as long as you always have the entire back of your ship covered in engines, they will always go at about the same speed, assuming they don't run out of fuel. Having a lighter ship does have a small effect on acceleration, but not a particularly major one, with a mass of 10,000 tons halving the possible acceleration. And as you can see over here, we're nowhere near that. What did make a big difference was swapping out these thrusters down at the bottom for platinum thrusters. These consume twice as much fuel, but then they produce twice as much thrust, and that makes the ship go significantly faster. It's not twice as fast due to the formula, but it is significantly faster. In order to get that upgrade done, however, Mark did put in a massive upgrade on the amount of low-density platform that we're producing over here on Maluna. So there's now a lot more of that being produced. It's then being passed around here and then also looped down to go into these chests, which can be loaded into rockets as and when required. So the ship sat over Maluna for a little while, grabbed up a huge amount of this platform, rebuilt itself with the lighter stuff, and then, yeah, as I say, we thought maybe it gained about 10% of a speed bonus, but we think actually that was mostly because it was flying towards planets rather than away from them when we saw the speed difference. So it doesn't seem to have helped. Mike has built another space platform, and this one is called the Norvian Harvest because it sits over Norvis and it harvests rocks, well, when there are any. At the moment there seems to be a complete absence of... No, there's some asteroid chunks coming in, there are a few. And the idea is this will collect in various asteroid chunks and then stockpile carbon and probably calcite in order to drop them down onto Norvis because they're needed down there in significant quantities. And the idea of the ship, the reason it's got some engines on the back of it, is that it can fly out to Maluna or Lignumis and then circle back and come back round to Norvis again, picking up lots and lots of chunks on the way. Because those two flights are completely safe. There are no big asteroids out there, which is why we don't have any guns across the front. There's only the little harmless ones that can be gathered easily by a ship. And so it'll sit here until there's a shortage of carbon on the ship, and then it'll bimble off to Maluna like this, and while it's moving we'll see a lot more asteroid chunks, and so it can then start grabbing them in, bring them on board, and then reprocessing them into the type of chunks it needs, and then making the fuel and the resources and so on. Maluna is not very far away, so it doesn't take very long to get there, but it can fly there, it then probably turn around almost immediately, okay, in 90 seconds, and then head back over to Norvis, gathering these rocks as required, and it just doesn't seem to need any at the moment, so that's fine. But as I say, it can turn all of that into carbon, which we're then able to drop down onto Norvis to supply that planet with all the carbon it could possibly want. On Vulcanus, we had a supply backlog jam up horrible problem thing happen. Yes, there's some good words. We ended up with coal backing up all the way along this belt, and then back up here and all the way back up here and into the processing systems here and here. And basically, we just jammed up completely on coal because it's one of the byproducts produced when you crush tungsten down into the crushed tungsten. You get coal as an output, and so that's a byproduct, and that means we need to use it as a priority over any coal that comes out of, for example, a coal mine like this one. It seems that we didn't have some of the priorities set up properly, so now we've got an input priority from here and here and here. So that just ensures that any coal that flows through is going to, by priority, come from the crushing, and then we'll top it up with the mine as and when required. So it's a nice, simple, easy fix, but it was absolutely required because the priorities were wrong, and having 4 times as much coal coming out of the drills due to the stacking we've now got meant that there was a lot more on the belt, so the belt flows more slowly, and that meant it wasn't leaving room for the coal coming out of the ore crushing. It is also possible that now we're bringing a lot of blue circuits over from Lignumis to be dropped in over here, that we've now ended up reducing the amount of plastic we're getting through, and therefore the amount of coal we're getting through, because it's being turned into plastic through a series of steps down here. And that slowed the rate that the copper belt is flowing even further, while still keeping the demands on the tungsten for making science packs and machinery and so on exactly the same. Corundum is one of our smaller factories by the looks of it. Okay, well, there's a lot of solar panels scattered around here, but the factory itself is actually really quite small. I'd forgotten how minuscule this one was, and maybe it was a planet we got through fairly quickly. I don't remember because it was a while back now. But there have been some improvements over here. I've doubled the processing rate of the dilute sulfuric acid. So over here, when we're making the iron and copper ore out of the chalcopyrite that's coming in from the mining over here, this produces dilute sulfuric acid as the final step over here. So I massively increased the number of machines we've got over here dealing with it and turning it into steam and proper sulfuric acid. The steam, I think, is then being brought over here in order to generate power, and I think we're using it in 1 or 2 other places around the factory as well. But we talked about that months ago in the previous series when we were out here on this planet. And with that, we've been able to get things running reasonably nicely again. we have had to put in a little bit more resource voiding, and you can see some running over here where we're destroying some of the crushed iron ore, some over here to destroy crushed copper ore, and then finally some down here which will just deal with any copper plates that are coming through. And the reason that these are running all the time, well, it seems a little bit weird, doesn't it? Because when we originally set this up, we had a system here where we were producing an amount of iron and an amount of copper, and we needed to keep those vaguely balanced. So when there was a shortage of copper, we would crush some iron so that then the system over here would flow a bit more and we get some more iron through. And similarly, if we had a shortage of iron, which I don't think we did because we're making lots and lots of circuits down here, and that's very, very copper hungry. But if we ever did have a shortage of iron, then crushing some copper to get rid of that would be entirely worthwhile and reasonable and make sense as well. However, we've discovered there is another resource on this planet that's produced from this process that we'd sort of forgotten about, and that's quite important as well. And that is that we need to have a decent quantity of sand coming through, and it's being produced over here as we crush the ores, and then it runs down the belt here, goes down through the system to down here, where it's then being turned into glass in order to make glass plates, which I think are then taken over to wherever the bus area is on this planet, up here apparently, in order to make the chemical plants, in order to make the advanced chemical plants. And so we need a steady supply of sand being produced over here. And so in order to get that, we've now started unloading crushed iron and crushed copper from these two areas and destroying that in an attempt to get a bit more. And that should get us everything we want. And you can kind of see the way the priority system is set up, because if we have a look at this inserter over here, this one's running whenever there's no glass at all. And so that'll then pull that out, it will then in theory produce more sand. And then the one over here is running whenever there's a shortage of copper, in an attempt to deal with some of the iron in order to get more copper to be produced. However, it seems like just these two weren't quite enough to keep up with what we needed, and so we've got an additional feed down here where we're taking some of the copper away with this splitter, and then all of these inserters down here are also running if there's no glass. And so the idea is that we destroy as much copper as we can, as we need to, in order to try and get some glass available, and then we destroy iron in order to get more copper flowing through. Unfortunately, it seems that we're able to destroy the copper at a significantly faster rate than we're able to destroy the iron ore, and therefore it's not really able to keep up. Maybe we should have a system feeding out from here directly across, rather than destroying crushed iron. Maybe we should copy this guy, put him in here, and also connect into that network there like that. So that will now also pass over a load of iron ore, and we can crush both the iron ore and the crushed iron ore, and that will allow us to keep the balance a bit more effectively. However, actually no, that's a bad idea. We don't want to do that, because we want to keep the iron ore being crushed as much as possible up here, because this step also produces a certain amount of sand. The problem is that we only have one of the crushers running, and that's a bit too slow. So perhaps what we actually need is to have an inserter down here, also connected to the same red circuit condition like that, passing steel through to be destroyed. And there are better ways to do this, but this is the general idea. And if we destroy some of the steel, then that will encourage all of the machines up here to run a little bit more, because then we'll need to produce slightly more molten iron, and so on and so on and so on. So perhaps this would be a slightly better way of doing things, except that it's jammed these machines up. So we'd need to rethink this, but this is what you might call the concept of a plan. Tristan has set it up to supply platinum to space, so we've got platinum plates coming out along here. They're being fed in here in order to make the science packs. And somehow, apparently, they're also being brought over here, although it's being done by bot. Okay, fine. Yeah, they're being brought over here by bot to a blue chest in order to allow them to be launched up to space and taken away to anywhere else that might need them, perhaps for making the platinum thrusters. That's a big thing that requires platinum. Tristan says he's got them being shipped onto the Dynamic Storyteller's incredible conveyance, which can take them over to Norvis with the science packs from this planet, in case they're needed there for thrusters and such likes. It looks like we've been getting through a decent amount of the science packs from this planet as well, because that's flowing merrily. We have loads of it in the chest here, so I don't see any problems with this. We've got plenty of it, but it is definitely flowing and being used, so that's good to see. We like that. Tristan's also set up a red boiler setup down here. So this is a system that brings in the petroleum gas, I believe. Yes, petroleum gas from the lakes here, and then presumably burns it, I guess. Yes, it burns it in the oxygen atmosphere in order to produce high-pressure carbon dioxide, which is passed into the thermoelectric engines, which can take in that high-pressure carbon dioxide and turn it into electricity. Now, that's interesting. The area that I thought were solar panels down here is actually all accumulators, because yes, I forgot, this is a lightning planet, and so we can collect lightning with the lightning conductors, charge up the accumulators to keep the place powered, but also we can top that up with these boilers down here. So, yeah, I don't know how necessary this is, but it'll be good for keeping the system running during the day when there's no lightning storms. Castra has seen some major changes as well, so we've been trying to keep this place safe. Now, if you remember, this is the one where it spawns in tanks every so often, just for funsies, and the tanks will bimble in towards your factory, and yeah, these guys will bimble in over towards your factory and then start plinking at it with their machine guns. So the plan is that we will eventually build this perimeter wall all the way around the outside of it. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do with this bit over here because there's a bit of a lake, but I'm sure if we have a wall that comes into about here and goes on from here, and then we have an additional wall sort of across here, I suspect it'll probably be okay, and the tanks won't be able to pathfind their way around it. So I think that's probably going to be all right, even if it's going to be a little bit funny. But yes, this wall, we are gradually expanding it all the way around, and Tristan's done most of the building around here with a bit of help from Mark, and as you can see, he's made some good progress. This wall is based around we've got some laser turrets in there, nice, and then we've got some bullet turrets to provide a bit more oomph, because bullet turrets do a lot more penetrative damage, and we've got flamethrowers because you might as well, especially when you've got a planet that has infinite lakes of, is this light oil? Probably. Infinite lakes of oil anyway that you can just pump straight into your flamethrowers to keep them running. Yes, light oil. However, all of this ammunition is being brought down here by bots to this logistics chest here, and then it's been put on, and things seem to be okay at the moment. We do have a healthy amount of ammunition all the way around here, being fed up along the wall and keeping everything armed and dangerous and running reasonably well. Diagonals are always fun, but we seem to have managed that. So this is working. However, we ran into a bit of a problem there, which I had to go in and fix in the last stream. So this area over here, you might remember from videos a while back, this is bringing in the millerite and trying to turn that into nickel and iron. And it's a little bit of a balancing act because we've got two different recipes. This one takes in sulfur and millerite and copper, and we can make copper, that's not too difficult. We have some nice big copper patches, and produces some iron and a little bit of nickel. This one takes in millerite and some carbon, but carbon appears to not be a problem either, and then produces a lot of nickel, some sulfur, and some molten iron. And so we're trying to balance the amount of sulfur that's coming out of here with the amount of sulfur that's being used here, and balance the amount of iron that's coming out of here and out of here with the amount of nickel that's coming out of here and here. And it is all a bit of a weirdness and a bit difficult. And so we're trying to produce both the iron as fast as we could, because previously our limiting factor was how quickly we could make the tanks over here, which are being used for making the science packs. And they use a lot of iron and a relatively small amount of nickel. So if we look in here, you can see we're using 50 nickel plate, but we're also using 15 iron gear, which is 30 iron plates, and 24 engine units, which is another 4 iron plates there, and then 5 plates worth of iron, but coming from molten iron probably for the steel there. So there's 9 in that, times 24. We're looking at about almost 250 iron versus 50 nickel to make the tanks. And so we need a lot more iron for this stage. And so we set up a system over here where we're avoiding massive quantities of nickel just to get rid of it when we had too much of it. And that was working quite nicely in that we were able to produce enough iron through the sort of the byproducts of these methods, and then feed it down here to be made into the engine units and the gears and everything that was needed. Fine. Then we got to a point where we'd done basically all the research that we needed to do with the Castra science, at least for the time being. So we didn't have that demand on the tanks anymore. However, we had that enormous demand on green ammunition to come down and fill the belts up down here to keep all these turrets loaded. And that meant in order to make the green ammo, we're using lots of nickel to make the yellow ammo, and then we're turning that into red ammo, but that requires millerite instead of steel, so that again didn't use any iron. And then over here into the green ammo, which just uses the uranium in the vanilla way. And so when there was a relatively low demand on the green ammo, this worked fine. We were churning out a quantity of green ammo, it was being taken away, it was fine. It was using up some of the byproducts, some of the nickel that we didn't really need that was being made over here. However, when we stopped making the tanks, we stopped needing the iron, so that stopped being taken away, and so we then just ripped through all of the nickel and had some problems. And so in order to sort that out, well, I did a two-step process. First, I dropped in this tank here as an emergency, just let's get this thing working again. So that's somewhere that we can just dump the molten iron out of all these foundries, so the nickel will start to flow again while I work out a proper solution to this problem. And then the proper solution is, unfortunately, is more recycling. Up here, we're making steel, and we're putting it into a box to cool, then we're making steel chests out of it, and then we're recycling those steel chests back into steel, because that's the fastest way to get rid of a large quantity of molten iron quickly. And this machine is set up to only run when there's more than 24,000 molten iron in the tank down there, so it'll only run when we've got too much iron. And the nice thing about this is because it's pulling out the molten iron rather than the iron plate from over here, it means that when this overloads and we use some of that up, it's this machine that'll be running, or these machines that'll be running, using the recipe that is much more efficient for making nickel, rather than this one over here, which is going to be producing less nickel per iron. So when we've got a shortage of nickel, we produce more nickel. The problem with this, which actually didn't occur to me during the stream and has just occurred to me now looking at it, is that this recipe produces a large quantity of sulfur as well. And so we need to sink that somewhere. Now, it isn't a problem yet because we're splitting it out here, apparently, sending it down this way, and trying to cram it through here. Okay, maybe it is a problem. Yes, we have jammed up on sulfur now, so that's another problem. So I guess we need another disposal system somewhere around here that will strip out any excess sulfur and then void that through a recycler, which is a bit of a pain because I thought I was there with this, but nope, we have now actually run out of nickel again. You can see there isn't any along here. This is going to be a problem. Now, we do still have 2,300 green ammo, so as long as we do a load of science and churn through some of this iron, then maybe it'll be okay, kind of, but I would much rather we had some way that was actually going to be safe and not cause problems later, so I guess I'm going to have to put some sort of pull on this sulfur up here and say when this system jams, you're going to have to pull some sulfur off and destroy it as well. And that's a shame because I don't really like voiding stuff, especially when it's stuff that's actually quite useful. But when you end up in these sort of positions where you have these byproducts and you can't be sure what proportions you're going to be using things in, there isn't really much of a choice. The final planet we're going to have a look at today is Gleba. And over on Gleba, there were some problems with the carbon fibre once again, and it's due to spoilage, as is traditional. And that was because the bioflux that was coming in along here wasn't very fresh. And so it was coming up here, and then some of it was spoiling on the belt along here. And previously I had a splitter in here that was filtering out any spoilage and dumping it onto this belt to take it away. And that wasn't working, because we were ending up with the problem where some bioflux gets into the splitter and it goes, well, I'm bioflux, I'm fine, I'm just going to sit here and block this belt. And so it wasn't being disposed of because it's still bioflux. But behind it, there was some spoilage, because the bioflux isn't coming through in strictly freshness order. You can see there's a little bit of spoilage on there to show that as an example. And so that was blocking up the belt along here, and so in order to fix that I've put in an inserter here, and I think that was a suggestion from chat, so thank you very much for that. So these are now both grabbing from the same place, so if there's any spoilage gets into here, which this then can't take, it will immediately be dumped out onto this belt to be taken away. This is technically a slower system for getting rid of the spoilage than the other would be, but it's more reliable and we don't need that much throughput. So down here, it's going to be a bit slow to start again when this starts running, because it's going to have to get rid of a lot of this spoilage first, but that's not going to take that long. So if we say, actually, let's run this system for a bit and see its kick in and start working. So I could come in here and I could say, actually, I want you to kick in just straight up all the time. There we go. So we've got a green signal coming out here. So this will run now. And there we go. We're having to pull this through and dump it onto the belt up there, which is not a problem. Maybe that should be a stack inserter so it can run a bit faster. But to be honest, it doesn't matter. There you go. So it's pulled through. And now we can pull the bioflux in. And that means we can now start chucking nutrients in along here. And that means as these nutrients flow through, the whole system will eventually kick back in. Now it takes a moment or 10 to kick back in because we have to unload all the spoilage, all the nutrients that have gone off from all of these machines, and then refill them all with fresh nutrients. But it will work. It'll trundle around like this, and before too long, we'll have got rid of all the spoilage that's coming through here. All the nutrients will have gone into the machines. They'll kick back in, and we'll be able to start. There we go. We've started producing the carbon fibre again already. So that's now going to run nicely. It'll run forever because I've broken the logic in there, but that's fine. It's just for demonstration purposes. We can now leave this running, and yeah, it'll now work. So having gone in and made that change has meant this will now no longer be a problem over here. Now this is one of those problems that would eventually have sorted itself out, because eventually the bioflux that was in the splitter would have spoiled and it would have gone through, and then we'd have got a little bit more bioflux into here. But the bioflux that's coming through here isn't necessarily going to be all that fresh, and so there's a fairly high chance that you're going to run into this problem again, and you're just going to have a smattering of spoilage and bioflux all the way down the belt. So it's going to keep starting and stopping and starting and stopping. And this sort of system, because it relies on getting a big load of nutrients in to get the whole system up and running, and more or less all at the same time, because you need to have everything running at once. You can't just have it running in fits and starts, because you'll get the fruit going off, or you'll get other other belts clogging up and things. It's not great if you just have it starting and stopping and starting and stopping. So you need to have it kick in and then run reliably, which is what this is doing. And so this is now fine, but it took a bit of a tweak to get it to that point. According to my notes, Mike has gone in and put in rocket turret defense on Gleba. This does not appear to be the case. I've had a look around that wall area. I've looked around this wall area, and there are no rocket turrets in there. So I don't know whether there was a communication problem there, whether I'm just looking whether that's actually a to-do list item rather than a done list item, or yeah, I don't really know. But apparently there's meant to be rocket defenses around here, and there quite clearly isn't. So that's something that maybe still needs to be done, should we say. And I've been talking for quite a long time. This is nearly a 50-minute recording. Hopefully it'll come down and be a decent amount shorter once I go in and do the edits. So thank you very much for watching all the way through this. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back to play some more of this on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time with the normal Planetary Pioneers stream, with the 5 of us all working on whatever planet we're working on when the stream goes live. So please come along and check that out on Twitch or YouTube. If you'd like to give Planetary Pioneers a try yourself, you can grab the mod from the Factorio mod portal and install it. You'll get all the planets, all our quality of life mods, and you can go nuts, see how you get on with that. And I'll be back on Wednesday as well, when I'll be playing something else. Now, I do expect to have finished Foundry by that point, but as of recording this, I haven't actually finished it, so I don't know for sure whether I'll be playing something else. So I guess you'll just have to come along on Wednesday and find out. That'll be from 8 PM UK time, and that's my solo stream for the week. These videos will be coming out every Thursday and Friday as well, so please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you in all the streams and all the future videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.